welcome to the early spring episode of Waterloo Gardens. I'm Laura Cotting, and we're at my house today. We're going to have a look at all my various little flower beds and talk about what gardeners do in the early spring. We'll be looking at the early spring blossoms. We'll also be looking at all of the behind-the-scenes structures and prep work that gardeners do in the early spring. Early spring is important in gardening because that's when you provide your plants with good nutrition. That's when you determine which plants lived through the winter, which ones need help, or which are doing a little bit too well and maybe need to be thinned back some. So as we go through the episode today, I'll be taking you on a tour around the property, and we'll be looking at the different plants, different types of plants, and I'll be talking about my observations of how they're doing. Our first spot today is this fountain. This fountain was my grandmother's. It has a lot of sentimental value for me. It's a statue of St. Francis of Assisi, patron saint of birds and wildlife, which are very important to me. The flowers here right now are the very early spring varieties of crocus, as you can see here, and then several shades of blue and purple of one of my personal favorites, the reticulated iris, and we'll be getting some close-up shots of those later on. I like seasonal variety in my gardens, always something blooming, so we can see already that the tulips, which come next after crocuses and irises, the tulips are sprouting and getting ready. This area in general is part sun, more shade than sun, so the varieties I plant here need to be shade tolerant. This is also because of the fountain, an area that gets more moisture than normal. So the varieties that I plant around the fountain can tolerate dense, wet soil and in part sun conditions. This spot in my yard is my iris garden. I adore irises. A nickname for them is the orchids of the Midwest. Right now, it's just coming out of the winter, so obviously the plants are just getting started. You can see their pointy little tips here, and they will be blooming full blast toward the end of May, early June. All of the irises in this bed are German irises, and I get them mostly online or from local stores. An important thing to realize about irises is that, like me, irises like to have bare feet. So that means that these bare roots here are actually called rhizomes, and they must be above the ground level. They have to be dry and exposed. They must have antifreeze in them to get through the winter, but there it is. What I'll need to do with the irises is I will need to feed them this spring, and I have some special organic iris rhizome food coming in, and as soon as I get it, I will need to gently dig around these rhizomes and put this powdered organic fertilizer in so that the plants are nurtured and they have larger blossoms. I noticed last year the blossoms were smaller than usual, which is one cue that it's time they got their feeding. I do have other plants kind of planted in here for some interest because, as I've said before, I always like to have something blooming. So you can see some of the crocuses on the edge. They're doing quite well. I have tulips coming up along the border here. We'll get some great pictures of them in May. And I also have another kind of plant called widow's tears, which I have clumps of them spread through the middle of the iris bed. So I have edging around the iris bed. The edging here is only plastic. The reason for that, two reasons for edging. One reason is to keep the grass from penetrating into the bed. Once grass gets into your flower bed, it's a real pain to get out. It's a real pain. Lots of individual digging on your hands and knees. You don't want it to get into your bed. The reason the border is plastic and not brick, I prefer brick, is because notice that this bed is on what they call the tree lawn. So that means that the city has an easement and it can come in and dig it up whenever it needs to for a street improvement project or something like that. I have to live with that. I know about it. I understand it. But I certainly wouldn't want to have brick borders get all dug up and destroyed. Plastic is easy to dig up and it's easy to replace. So, the other important thing about early spring for gardeners is if you get on top of it, you can do a great deal to keep your weeds from running over your garden. In this bed, there are lots of little broadleaves weeds already sprouting. So my job for this week coming up is to get in here and dig them all out right now before they get large and bushy. In my gardening, I avoid chemical herbicides. So for me, that means a lot of hand weeding work and a lot of use of organics, which means timing is very important. And this is one of the primary times of the year to get on top of your weeds when they're small, and then they don't get big. This bed has two themes. It has a spring theme and a summer theme. The spring theme is all about daffodils and tulips. The summer theme is lilies and sedum. So as you can see, right now the daffodils are just poking up through the leaves. The tulips are just poking up. This is a variety of sedum that I like a lot because it turns color with the temperature. It's called angel weed. Another tree lawn bed, so it has the plastic border around it. And the other thing about this bed is that the soil was just awful. So I had to dig it up about a foot down and replace it all with good quality black organic soil. And then I was actually able to get something to grow here. Another thing about this bed was that this tree lawn used to have ash trees on it, and then the emerald ash borer came along. So the city cut down the 3 ash trees. That's why I was able to put these beds in the first place. But I still have the remnants of the ash tree root systems, which I get into whenever I'm trying to dig. It suddenly, boom. So what I did to deal with that, and you can't see it too well under the leaves, but I actually exposed parts of the ash roots and made them as part of stepping stones. I have stepping stones in here so that I can walk in and around the bed without stepping on plants to do my weeding. Now, in our first episode, I talked about dwarf fruit trees. This is our dwarf cherry tree. It's called a Carmine Jewel dwarf cherry tree. The fruit are great in pies, not so great for table because they're very sour, but the birds don't eat them, so that's a good thing. Right now, what I want to see in this cherry tree is I want to see the leaf buds greening up, which they are doing. So did this dwarf cherry tree get through the winter? It got through the winter beautifully. I don't see any damaged parts. I don't see any branches where the buds are shriveled looking. They're all looking just like they're supposed to. So it's looking good for this cherry tree for now. You'll notice that there's this pole stuck in the ground running through the middle of the cherry tree. The reason that is there is because sometimes we get these killer frosts in the first week of May, and that's right when this tree's flower buds are just about ready to open. Worst time for a fruit tree to get a frost. So what I do is I get wool blankets and bungee cords and bungee the limbs together so it's more compact, and then we wrap wool blankets around the whole tree, and that has succeeded all the years that it has happened, and this tree is 10 years old now. So that's what the pole is for, and I'm happy that this tree has gone through another winter and looks like it'll give us another great yield. This is my oldest flower bed. I started this bed a couple of years after we moved here. I started this bed in 2008. This bed is arranged, I dug it out of the hillside, and it's arranged in bands or rows. And what it's supposed to do is there's supposed to be flowers representing every color in the spectrum. Diversity is something that matters a lot to me. The rainbow has been a lifelong important symbol to me. So this bed is my rainbow bed. This bed is arranged in the colors of the prism: purple, blue, yellow, orange, and red, all in the spectrum. So this bed also has the most seasonal variety. I've had many years to work with it now, so lots of experimenting and figuring out what works. What we have right now in my blue, violet, purple area are the reticulated irises and the crocuses, small crocuses, large crocuses. In the yellow band, we have yellow crocuses and a very early blooming variety called winter aconite, and white crocuses. Nobody blooming quite yet here in the pink and red, but here we'll have tulips and early spring clematis, and of course daffodils. And back here we have my rich red tulips and daffodils that have red and orange centers. So that's coming up in May. As I've mentioned a couple of times already, because my property originally had so many trees on it, the only sunny places available were on the tree lawn. And here we have an example of where I got lucky, because they had to do this project to lay cable over to Trek, but have somehow managed to do all the digging and laying in of the cable without hurting any of my flowers. I'm so psyched. Good luck. It's very good luck. At the edge of the curb here, okay, I'm soft-hearted when it comes to plants, and I don't want to just throw them out when they're not doing what I want them to do. Here's an example. These are flowering chives. Originally, I had them in this garden, and they took it over. But I didn't just want to throw them in the garbage. So I planted them along this curb, which is a very unfriendly place for plants. Plants have to be tough to grow here because of the salt and the huge high snowbanks, etc. The chives are doing wonderfully. And they look great a little later on in the year because they have all these fuzzy-headed flowers and they look like something out of Dr. Seuss. So this is my little chives border. This is where I have chives and I have winter bloom, I have salvia, and I have my sun-loving herbs. Oregano is a sun-loving herb that is very tough, goes through winters well. I have Mexican oregano, and I have German oregano, or Greek oregano, excuse me. Right now they're under all the mulch, but you'll see them later on in the series. Now we're taking a look at the other part of my tree lawn gardens. We do have a corner property, so this is the long side, and you can see the different little patches I have spread out along the tree lawn. Each patch has a different theme to it, because again, I like smorgasbord, I like diversity, and what I like with these is that I have plants that are blooming during most of the year, and each bed has a color. So this color, this bed is my pink bed. It has columbines in it, which are just coming up now. So remember, spring is when you see who lived through the winter. My columbines lived, and my hyacinths lived. They're poking up through the leaves. This is where I have the dianthus, otherwise known as pinks, and other later blooming pink flowers. Japanese bottle brush, for example. So this is the pink bed. The next bed is my yellow bed. So over here are where the daffodils and the tulips are just getting ready to get started. And I have creeping Jenny, which is a nice ground cover that has very golden green foliage in keeping with the theme of yellow. I have some wonderful medium-sized irises here. We'll be seeing those in a couple of months with yellow blossoms. Another thing that you notice in the early spring garden is what kind of structural repairs you need to do. As I mentioned before, I like to use edging, and on the tree lawn I only use plastic, although on this tree lawn I also have some brick edging that's just set into the soil. You can see the brick edging here. Reason for all that, partly to keep water in, but also to keep the grass out. What happens though is over the winter, as the ground freezes and thaws and shifts, you get what they call frost heave. So here's some of my edging that I saved to show you that got heaved up through frost heave. So part of what I'll be doing over this coming week is going around with a hammer and just pounding it all back in. Not hard, you just have to do it. This is my red bed. Lots of tulips in this one, and my first tulip blossom, yay, today, right here. Shocking scarlet color, good stuff. I have another variety of iris here. There aren't really true red irises. The reddest you can get is a reddish purple, but those are here. And some hyacinths. Again, we'll see them later. This is a purple bed, and just as an aside, I'm actually very madly in love with my husband, even after 27 years of marriage, and he likes purple. So I've planted lots of purple plantings around the driveway, so when he comes home, he comes in to purple flowers. So this is one of the purple beds. Right now it has the crocuses and reticulated irises that we've been seeing so far. But it's got hyacinths coming, tulips coming. It's got all manner of exciting purple flowered plants scheduled for the rest of the year. And here, going to give you a little closer look here, I have some snowdrops. The amazing thing about snowdrops is they bloom in March, and these particular blossoms that you'll see a close-up shot of later, these blossoms lived through having 2 feet of snow on them for 4 days, and they look great. Snowdrops are amazing plants. So, these 2 trees here are new arrivals. We decided to try apple trees as another fruit tree. These are both dwarf trees. This is their 3rd year. One of the things that we learned about apple trees is if you want apple trees to actually bear fruit, you must plant 2, each of a different variety. I'm kind of concerned about them, partly because they're new and a new plant is vulnerable, but also because we have a problem with something called cedar apple rust. And cedar apple rust is a fungus of the rust type, and it shares hosts. It spends some of its time in cedar trees, some of its time in apple trees. And the cedar trees can tolerate it okay, but it can kill an apple tree, especially a young sapling like these 2. So I did some reading, and this year I'm going to try using organic fungicides treatments on these trees to see if I can get a grip on the cedar apple rust. What the rust does with a young tree is it attacks the leaves and destroys them. They turn brown, they shrivel, and then the leaves can't do what the leaves are supposed to do to give nutrition to the plant. And like I said, it can kill a tree. The fungicides I'm going to try are based on using tiny amounts of copper in them. And there's specific timing requirements about when they are applied and also where they are applied on the plant. I'm going to use 3 types, 1 to treat the soil with, 1 to treat the plant with, and then there's a 3rd kind that you're only supposed to use when the flowers are in bud but not open yet. It's got to be then, because these fungicides also work with the life cycle of the cedar apple rust fungus itself. It tries to get in there during a vulnerable part in that fungus's life cycle. So with these, as I've mentioned in our first episode, we have this thick lens of heavy clay soil. So for a tree to prosper, especially a young fruit tree, we have to dig a deep hole to punch through that clay lens, fill the hole with rich, nutritious soil, then put the tree in, put mulch around the top, even just, wood chippings to keep the soil moist, and give this tree the best possible start you can give it. This plastic wrap here is recommended to protect the trunk while the sapling is young and vulnerable, not only just from animal damage, but they can actually get sunburned, as I found out, which I didn't know. So wish us luck with these. It'll be a few more years yet before we know if we're actually going to get apples from them, or if they're even going to live. Another feature in the spring garden, as I said, you can you can see structures that gardeners use to help their plants. This is my little border of peonies, and these are different types of peony ring that I've been experimenting with to see which works best for my peonies. The older plants especially get to a certain height, as you can see in some of these taller peony rings, and then the blossoms are so heavy that the stems flop over, and instead of a lush, bountiful looking peony plant with these big blooms, you see this sad flopped over plant with blossoms lying in the grass. So that's why we have these peony rings. Give a little extra support to the plant. Right now they're still dormant. As part of my walking around, I've noticed the buds aren't quite poking up through the soil yet, but the minute they do, I will need to clean out all the dead leaves and stems so that we don't get mold and fungus incubating in there and damaging the regenerating plant heads. So finally, in this area of my yard, this has been one of my more challenging beds. The reason partly is because there have been a lot of changes in the environment around it. So I can't really get plants established here quite like I want them to. And the other reason why it's been challenging is because grass keeps getting in here. I've got all this grass, and I didn't dig it out when I should have last year. So that means I need to get on it this week. Otherwise, I'm going to spend all summer with a little trowel trying to dig this grass out. As I've mentioned, my husband loves purple, so this bed is supposed to have a lot of purple flowers in it. And I am starting to get some going, some purple columbines, some campanula, which is the name for bellflower. So we're getting there, but hopefully we'll see nicer footage of it as the growing season goes on. On this section of my yard, I have naturalizing daffodils. In gardening terms, naturalizing a plant means that it is so comfortable where you have it planted that it spreads on its own. So this part of the lawn has daffodils. They're coming up. They will all bloom. And the beauty of it is that when the daffodils are through blooming and you've enjoyed their spring color, the plant starts to go dormant right about the time that you should mow your lawn. So you can go ahead and enjoy the spring color of the daffodils, making a nice border here. And then when they're all done, it's time to mow your lawn. You can mow your lawn, and the daffodils pop right back up next spring season. So fun thing to do, and there are also neat little tools that you can get, because the bulbs need to be planted about 6 feet deep. You can take a water jet auger, screw it into your garden hose, and it uses water pressure to punch a hole down into the ground, plop the bulb in, it's already watered, tap in a little dirt, and you're done. Pretty cool. We are standing here at my vegetable garden. As you can tell for yourselves, there's really not a whole lot to look at here yet. We'll do our tilling of the soil and planting in the early part of May. But this section here is new. It's an experiment. A friend of mine is an amazing organic gardener, and she gave me tips on how to grow our own garlic. We eat a lot of garlic in our family, wanted to grow our own, couldn't figure it out. So what Lynn said was, plant your bulbs in the fall, mulch them with at least 6 inches. So we took raked up our leaves and put them in here. And as you can see, the plants are popping up through the leaves quite nicely. These plants were popping up through the leaves even with a foot of snow on top. And the other thing Lynn said was, but don't leave the mulch on too long. So another thing to do this week, as I said, early spring is a very busy time for gardeners, taking all the mulch up. Now, something I want to say about mulch in general is that mulch, especially dead leaves mulch, is very important for good insects, beneficial insects. They lay their eggs, they have their pupae, their chrysalises in this mulch. And it's not like gross or anything, that's just part of their life cycle. So if you get rid of your mulch too early and just like bag it up and get rid of it, you're harming the insect life on your property. These are insects that are beneficial. They're pollinating insects. They're good for your plants. They're good for your vegetables. But I do have to get this up now. Normally they say, well, wait until May. I can't wait until May. So my mulch gets loaded up in the wheelbarrow and I put it around the base of my pine trees. And that way the insect life is preserved, but my garlic can still be happy and not suffocate under this layer of mulch. We'll be looking at the other part of my yard. This part of our yard is all about ornamental trees and shrubs. There are 2 kinds of peonies. There's your regular bush peony, and then there's a kind of peony called a tree peony. This is a tree peony. I have another over there. Right now is when they're just starting to set their flower buds. So how did this plant get through the winter? It got through the winter just great. I can tell because these buds are filling up, they're plump, and they're turning a reddish color. A lot of the tree peony can be snipped off. This is where there was a seed pod from last year. But with the tree peony, they don't die back like the bush peonies do. These stems stay and slowly increase as the plant gets older. Tree peonies can get to be about 6 feet tall and live for 80 to 100 years. So, very impressive plant, and it will simply get more impressive with time. This is a new bed. Our family loves blueberries, so we thought we'd try to grow our own. And I learned when reading up on blueberries is just like apple trees, you have to have at least 2 plants, 1 of each variety. So somehow that makes them reproduce and set fruit. If you just have 1 plant or 1 plant of or several plants of just 1 variety, you're not going to get fruit. Blueberries like very acid soil, so that's why we made a separate bed, a raised bed, so we can control the soil pH and make it more acid than the normal regular soil that we have all around it. I like to use organics whenever possible, so when I filled this bed, I used time-release pellets to make the soil more acid, but even more important is to keep mulching with pine needles. So we have these great big pine trees back here, rake up the needles, fill up the bed with it, and that will make the soil more acid organically over time. This is just the 2nd year for these little blueberry plants, so don't judge. They're just getting started. And I see that they have made it through the winter because the stems, little twigs here, are a nice yellow-green color, and the little buds on the end are starting to swell look a little orangish red. As a ground cover on my blueberry bed, I've also planted some rhubarb. So some of it is poking through here already. And the nice thing about the rhubarb is because its big leaves provide so much shade, it acts as a natural weed suppressant in my little blueberry bed. Over here, I have hydrangeas. And this is your typical hydrangea. It's a shrub. It has the big puffs of white blossoms. I give it some support because otherwise it will flop over and kill all the grass underneath like it did before I put the support in. Here I'm trying an experiment. I really like the hydrangea sort of trees that I see in nurseries where the stem is long and straight and then it bushes out on top. But I didn't want to pay $75. So I took a bush that was already kind of skinny and I've been ruthlessly pruning it ever since. So we'll see if this turns into a hydrangea tree or not. I have lilacs. I love lilacs. So here's one lilac. We had a period last summer where we had high-speed, very hot, very dry winds, and I worried that those killed this lilac because the leaves all died. But these leaves are nice. These leaf buds are fat, yellowish green. I see no dead twigs at all. Made it through the winter just fine, and it's going to be a happy, healthy lilac tree again. This is a lilac called a primrose lilac. It has yellow blossoms instead of purple. Happy lilac over here, same deal. This is a hibiscus. It's showing no signs of life at all, but that's okay because it won't until May. Here I have table grapes that I'm training, one plant in back, and I'm training it to divide in two and go around this stump, which has a carving in it. I have a plastic bag over the carving to shield it from the elements. One of my summertime projects is going to be to put a protective acrylic coating over the carving, and then I can take the bag off. So these poles eventually will support the two arms of the grape bush, and the grape will kind of embrace the carving on the trunk. There's the whole concept there. Other things, that is a ginkgo tree, and I learned something about ginkgo trees that I didn't know when I planted this one, and that is that ginkgo trees have male and female plants. The females produce a berry after they're about, or a fruit, when they're about 10 or 11 years old, that smells really bad. And there's no way you can tell a male or a female plant without gene testing unless the nursery itself swears that it's a male plant that you got. Well, this was on sale and it was for cheap, and I don't know. I'm not going to know for another 8 years. I might have to cut it down. I don't know. Here is an example again of frost heave. I thought this kind of wooden fence-like border was cute, but I'm going to have to replace it. This is only its second year, and no, it's not good. Another experiment I did was putting a coconut fiber matting down around the base of my ornamental trees and bushes. I really like it. Moisture can get in. If I want to put some extra nutrition down, it can get through the matting, but it suppresses weeds. So recommend, and it's not that expensive. Over here, this was something that my husband decided to do for me for Mother's Day one year. My birthday and Mother's Day are pretty close together. So my husband and sons built this big planter, and in it I have more irises and tulips. It gets a little bit more shade than the iris bed that I showed everybody at the beginning. So let's plants are a little later in the cycle, the bloom cycle, the sprout cycle. I have tree lilies in it as well. Tree lilies grow to be 6 to 8 feet tall, and they have enormous flowers. So we'll be seeing those later. So an important part of being an amateur gardener or a gardener in any respect is adequate water. We have had some problems with the more gardens that I put in, etc. It's been making our water bill get a little higher than we like. Also, we've had some occasional droughts. That means getting the water bill higher than we'd like. So we thought, let's harvest our rainwater. Let's collect our rainwater. And it's soft water. It doesn't have chlorine or what have you in it, so it's really better for the plants. This is our first attempt at collecting our own rainwater. And this was something my youngest son discovered when going along on the internet. The Sauk School District was having a sale of its outmoded equipment and stuff. So this beauty is an old chlorine tank from their pool. It's super heavy duty plastic, it's reasonably lightweight, holds 160 gallons, and we use it to collect the water coming off this side of the roof of our shed. This summer I'm going to spray paint it because unfortunately with the clear or the translucent white plastic, it lets algae grow. So you can see here these darker areas. This is where there's algae growing. So part of the spring chores will be to take this down and hose it out and clean it up, get the algae out of it, and then I'll have to spray paint it. If the light can't get in, then the algae won't grow. We did drill the hole to put the spigot in, but otherwise, $5, but we had to go get it. We have liked this so much that we've decided to try to harvest water that comes off of the roof of our house, collect the rainwater there. That's what these are for. These used to store canola oil, and they were resold. We bought them from a farmer outside of Watertown who bought a whole semi-load and then flipped them. These were $60 a piece. They hold 250 gallons a piece, and they're nice because they have the inlet here. So you can imagine like a hose or a drain spout going down into that. But then on the bottom, they already have their valves and spigots. You don't have to put your own in, all ready to go. So be alert for further developments on this nature as we figure out how to get the water off our roof to go in these. And of course, these are going to be over by the house. They're not going to be over here. These aren't reliably for sale anywhere. You can't like go to Northern Tractor Supply or someplace and buy one. You have to look on the internet and see who's selling them. Places in Milwaukee will sell them in big lots, and you can come get one. 2 of these fit in 1 pickup truck. So if you're serious about wanting these, bring a pickup truck. And I was talking about naturalizing. See this pretty crocus? I didn't do that. The crocuses are starting to move over out into the lawn. I love it. Look forward to seeing more of them pop up. Spring color. And I can mow over it and it'll be back. Thank you all for joining us for a spring episode of Waterloo Gardens. And again, if you or somebody you know really loves gardening and would like to share your love of gardening and what you've learned along the way with the community, please contact us at WLOOCATV@gmail.com. We'd love to have you join us. Thank you.